Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Neil Coulong. I am your host today of this special edition of the New Standard podcast. Typically, Lance Williams, the regular host of our show, is here with me. Lance is unfortunately out on assignment, unable to cover today's big news. And you may or may not have heard this yet, as reported by multiple outlets. I believe Tom Pelissero of NFL Network was first with it. The Steelers and Los Angeles Rams are in final discussions to confirm a trade that would send veteran wide receiver Allen Robinson to the Steelers in exchange for something, as of the time of this recording, not confirmed yet. We can safely assume it would not be for a first or second round pick. And if it is, we will have another podcast to discuss the sheer and insane stupidity of that. I would imagine it would be for not a whole lot of draft capital. The contract breakdown for Robinson right now is he received a $5 million bonus, roster bonus from the Rams already, which, according to Adam Schefter of ESPN, the Rams will pay for. And some deal between the two of them will pay the $10 million in salary Robinson is due this year. The exact proportion of that is not known right now, but the Rams will be paying part of the $10 million he is owed on a pretty hefty contract for a veteran receiver who has not played a whole lot the last 2 years and is still going to be on the books for the Steelers next season as well. This is a tale of two receivers for the most part. Allen Robinson, you may or may not have noticed. If you're a fantasy football player, you probably paid more attention to Allen Robinson than many have across the league. In 2015, he had 80 catches for 1,400 yards and 14 touchdowns for the Jaguars, the team that drafted him in the second round back in 2014 out of Penn State. Went off a little bit the second year and missed most of the 2017 season with a torn ACL. Contract issues emerged at that point. He was traded to Chicago. Took him a little bit to get going there. In 2019, he had 98 catches for 1,147 yards with our buddy Mitch Trubisky under center. I believe he made a Pro Bowl as well. And if we're talking about Mitch Trubisky, we have to bring up multiple Pro Bowl appearances whenever we can, because that is the only thing Trubisky has earned in his career. Just because it's a special podcast doesn't mean those jokes are going to stop, just so you guys know. He backed that up in 2020, 102 catches on 151 targets, 1,250 yards and 6 touchdowns. His numbers at this point appear very similar, as Steelers fans would know, to Deontay Johnson's, playing a similar role with the Bears offense as Johnson has in Pittsburgh. He's more inside than outside, but just like Johnson, he is adept at running underneath routes, inside stuff. He's not a game-breaking player, but a very effective, very talented NFL receiver when healthy. That is the big question mark with Robinson. After a productive 2020 season, he played just 12 games in his last season in Chicago, 38 catches, 410 yards, and a touchdown with the Bears. He was traded to the Rams in the offseason, where he played last season in just 10 games, picking up 33 catches for 339 yards. Back-to-back sub 11 yards per catch for Robinson, who was plagued with injuries over both of those seasons. There are multiple ways to look at this trade. I think first and foremost, the biggest thing to point out is a complete lack of production over the last 2 years. Average production at best, extensive injury issues with a very hefty contract. Now, we don't know the details of what the Rams are going to be paying for Robinson to play for the Steelers this season, nor do we know what the Steelers are going to be sending back to the Rams in compensation for this trade. Steelers usually like to trade future fifth-round draft picks. They don't have any of those this year to trade. So no Akello Witherspoon acquisitions, no I can't believe I'm freezing on his name. The linebacker from Jacksonville. Somebody help me out. I totally forgot his name. Yeah, forgettable player. I guess they don't need the 5th round pick. They don't usually like 5th round picks, or at the very least, they view 5th round picks as tradable commodities and have not often used that pick in recent years. They don't have one of those this year. They do have one next year that they can trade. Perhaps that's the move here. Perhaps the Rams just want to shed some contract. It's an interesting time for them to do that, considering they have already committed to paying the $5.25 million roster bonus that Robinson picked up, which really doesn't help the Rams a whole lot, but does get an oft-injured player off of their books for next season, in which Robinson is due $10 million in base salary, again for the 2024 season, with a $5.75 million roster bonus. Interesting to note as well, I got a chuckle out of this. Robinson can void the 2024 season of his contract if he has over 2,200 receiving yards between 22 and 23. For Robinson to earn the right to void that contract, what that would mean is he needs approximately 1,870 yards in the 2023 season. And I'll be honest, in this offense with this team, Joe Schobert, thank you. With this offense and this team, I really don't think he's going to be able to achieve that. But this is usually where I say weirder things have happened. Not really. I don't know how many weirder things would be than Allen Robinson, 2023 Allen Robinson picking up close to 1,900 yards, which would give him the right to void a contract. At this point, I think Robinson would absolutely love to have a contract in 2024. And that's really what this is going to be about for him. This is a pure reclamation assignment. He has a second year remaining on his contract right now. That is all but void, like the last 2 years that are officially on his contract are. He's going to have to show a lot in order to stick around long term. But if we want to get into who Robinson is today, what we have seen of Robinson, it's difficult because there's not a whole lot out there. Primarily, though, my sense on Robinson has been, and you have to think this is still going to be the case, considering the injuries, the wear and tear that he's put on. Robinson is an excellent underneath receiver, similar to the game that that Steelers wide receiver Deontay Johnson has. Not to compare the two physically. I don't think there is a comparison between them right now. We'll see. We just haven't seen enough of Robinson. But Robinson is an excellent underneath receiver. He can run whatever route you give him from wherever on the field. I would suspect the Steelers view him as a slot receiving option. He is a highly expensive one, and one that they're going to have to give up capital for. On this show and in social media, I have mentioned multiple times the idea that the Steelers have been hoping to get Anthony Miller, another former second-round pick who didn't work out with his original team, to produce out of the slot. If they don't feel that Miller is capable of doing that, if they want to use both of them, or more than anything, if they wanted to have a veteran receiver and not have to draft one, that very well could have happened. I want to thank listener William Purdy, who is giving us draft compensation, according to him. I have not seen this yet, but that doesn't mean that it hasn't happened. The Steelers are giving the Rams their 4th round pick this season, in next week's draft, a draft in which the Steelers do not have very many picks anyway. And the Steelers are getting back Allen plus the Rams' 5th and 7th round pick. Wow, if that's really the case, really they're trading salaries. This deal would be perhaps a step up in terms of commitment for the Steelers than it was with William Jackson when they acquired the Commanders cornerback at the trade deadline last year. I really don't, yes, thank you, Steelers Wire. If that is truly the compensation, I don't know if he keeps stealing Sean McVay's parking spot and they really want to get rid of him, but that's just nothing That'd be a really weird trade in which the Steelers would seem to get the value in both sides of it. I don't know. We'll see on the compensation. I think a fourth rounder is too high. I think a pick next year makes a lot more sense. I think if the Rams want to save money on a receiver who has not been healthy the last 2 seasons and ship him out for something, I could see them doing a pick from the 2024 draft. That would make more sense to me, but there are plenty of reasons, as you no doubt have figured out on your own, that I don't run an NFL team. So we'll see. We'll see how it ends up. Some of your comments, this one stands out probably more than anything because as we sit right now, it's hard to disagree with that. He hasn't played. As somebody who is on the north side of 40 years, tries to keep in shape, I can tell you that you don't get better at whatever you're doing the older you get. When you are not able to do that as often, which Robinson hasn't, he really is not going to progress as an athlete. His Jarvis Landry like 10.8 and 10.3 back-to-back yards per catch totals in seasons that ended with injury are really not a very good sign for the long-term viability within Pittsburgh. Without knowing how much the Rams are paying versus how much the Steelers are paying of his contract, we can't really say this matters a whole lot right now. We'll see. The Steelers enjoy, as we've seen in recent years, picking up veterans for low draft capital, even if they have high contracts. They seem to want to bring them in, fill a role. Joe Schobert, thank you, Marcus. Thank you for listening, Marcus. I'm honored with your presence. The Godfather himself, Marcus Mosier, appearing in the comments. As we knew from the Joe Schobert deal, they took on a decent amount of salary. Schobert was less than adequate, was cut after 1 season. And I don't think that it really mattered ultimately. Would have been nice to have that pick. They need a linebacker. But as was suggested within the comments, perhaps this is more about not having to draft with a higher pick somebody at the position. I could see the Steelers not wanting to draft another young wide receiver. I also want to dive into the depth chart here a little bit because that's really where I'm going with this. Right now, Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, and a lot of unknown goes after that. Everyone's going to talk about how great Calvin Austin is, which I think is amazing because nobody has seen Calvin Austin play. He has not dressed on Sunday. He barely dressed for training camp, and that was last year. Again, you don't get better at football by not playing football. We don't know where he's going to be. You hope he's good. Obviously, we hope he's good. The King something called candidate, something called Gunnar Olszewski is still on the roster. That's nice to have, I guess. Anthony Miller, who I mentioned before as well, was a candidate to be released with an injury settlement last year, but the team put him on IR, which effectively guaranteed his salary for last season and kept him on the team. You would think if they're going to do that with a veteran player, they would have wanted they would have had eyes on him for next year's team. I would think that's what Miller would be, but we don't know about him either. We're not really sure how that's going to work out. What we know right now is the Steelers are an offense in flux. Robinson might give them the veteran presence that they want. Miles Boykin is another player, by the way, who was not signed. Definitely more of a special teams guy than a receiver. You're not in a great position when you have to throw Miles Boykin the ball, which is why he averages about a target and a half a year. I think the veteran money that they want to spend on a guy like Robinson, they have earmarked for that, as opposed to drafting another receiver, which it's not as simple as it seems. Just bring the young guy in and let him go out there and give it hell. You got to train him. You have to coach him. There's a lot of work that goes into that. They have a lot of young guys now as it is. I've joked about this a couple times on this show. I was banging the table hard for George Pickens last year, and I didn't think there was a way in the world he would still be available when the Steelers went on the clock in the second round. George Pickens is far from a complete product right now. Got a lot of good reps last year. We saw him make a lot of highlight-worthy catches. He doesn't run real clean routes. He's still noisy in his movement. He's a young receiver. You expect that. Even in the second round, you expect him to be a bit behind the curve as far as what a high-end NFL receiver would look like in space. A lot of work he still needs to do. Coaches need to work on that. You mentioned Austin. Austin doesn't even have a training camp under his belt. Doesn't even have a season under his belt. Where is he going to be? Throwing another rookie into that mix, it's tough. I can understand that being a problem. I have supported the idea of Jordan Addison at some point in the first 2 picks for the Steelers. I like Addison's game. It's not a connection thing with Kenny Pickett. I like what he is able to bring. And looking at the Steelers' depth chart over the next couple of years, they're going to have to add to that. Unless you're looking at extending Deontay Johnson, I'm not sure they want to do that. His contract is getting messy here fairly quickly. I'm not sure if that's going to be we don't know right now what they would do with that. We like Pickens. That's one guy. You need 2 receivers in today's NFL. So I think, if anything, this kind of suggests they got a veteran in there, a receiver who knows what he's doing, a highly adept route runner, an underneath guy. The injury risk is there. The compensation piece of it is just something we have to deal with. I don't have $5 million to burn, but the NFL teams kind of do. So I could see why they might want to do that. Overall, I think my immediate reaction to this was the Steelers like to make these kinds of moves, and they tend to trade mid-round picks in order to get them. The development of the Steelers' depth chart is obviously going to be paramount, but I think we're looking at another rent-a-player situation. Schobert being one of those. Akella Witherspoon, who earned an extension during his tryout season. We've seen the Steelers dive into players like this. William Jackson, they tried to make that work. That didn't work out. I think Robinson is potentially more on the higher end of those deals as opposed to just, kind of useless acquisitions like Jackson. And I was somebody who said Jackson was going to contribute. I liked his fit with their scheme. I don't know what happened there. I just know that William Jackson hasn't signed with anybody yet either. So not much of a market for him. Who knows what's happening with that? The long and the short of it is, for the Steelers, it really just could be a depth addition. It's going to come down to how much money the Rams are paying. It's what the Steelers are giving up to acquire that depth player. I also was kind of beside myself last year when they picked up Boykin in waivers for $3 million. $3 million for a wide receiver who might catch literally 1 pass a season seems like a high amount of money. It is kind of the top of market value for a special teams player, which is what Boykin was, and Boykin was a good one. We saw that multiple times last season. I would say they probably don't want to bring Boykin back at that price if they have Robinson, who's theoretically going to cost more than that. The door might be shut there. I don't think it spells good things for Olszewski either, but considering Olszewski, who was brought in to return kicks and couldn't return punts and couldn't do that last season, I didn't like his chances of making this team anyway. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised to see if he's released sometime here in the near future. It's still a position in flux, and I think that's probably the right way to frame this right now. We can reserve the right to react perhaps a little bit more harshly, depending on what the Steelers are giving up. And even then, it's his health. How healthy is he going to be? The Steelers need a slot receiver. And what I mean by that is the guy running underneath doesn't necessarily mean he has to attack only from the slot position. He's not going to be an outside guy. He's not running 15-yard routes. He's going to run the underneath stuff. That can open Johnson up a little bit more. That can force defenses to stop keying on Johnson on the underneath part the way that they did, and largely shut down his yards after catch production. It could give them another option on the other side of the field away from Johnson to make hay in short yard or short route situations. He might fit that bill fairly well. And if we're talking the difference of a couple $1 million, we've seen the Steelers not really scrimp in that regard when it comes to a veteran the last couple of years. It seems like they have one of those projects at a higher cost each season. Somebody is coming in at the price of a mid-round to late-round draft pick who probably gets paid a little bit more than what they'll end up producing, but they seem okay with it. I'm not saying that that's what I would do. I'm saying that I am not in that position, but I'm translating the moves that they are making. Again, you are listening to the New Standard podcast and video. I am your host, your solo host today, Neil Coulong. Lance Williams is usually with me, but he is unable to make this one. We wanted to break in and discuss a little bit about the pending move. It's not finalized yet. The pending move the Steelers are making in a trade for Rams wide receiver Allen Robinson. We know that Robinson is due $10 million this season in his base salary. He has a $5 million roster bonus that was converted and is now guaranteed that the Rams are paying for. And we know the Steelers and the Rams are splitting up some percentage, some portion of his $10 million base salary. We don't know how much that is yet. We don't know exactly if somebody has seen it, what the compensation is yet. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a pick in 2024 because the Steelers do not have very many picks in this draft. I don't think that they'd want to give up their first, one of their twos, a 3 or a 4 for Allen Robinson. The Steelers also have 2 7th-round picks in this draft. I don't know if the Rams would have made that deal. I don't know. There's a lot that's still kind of up in the air here. I want to talk a little bit about Robinson as a player and remind you, Lance will be back in all his glory tomorrow when the New Standard has its full show starting at 10:30 a.m. Eastern, 7:30 a.m. Pacific, right here, same bad time, same bad channel, where I don't have to sit and talk at you the entire time by myself, which I'm sure you guys all love hearing. Questions, comments, concerns. Who else has got something here? Let's talk Allen Robinson. We are going to go over the draft quite a bit. That was our plan until about 45 minutes ago, in which the news of Robinson coming to Pittsburgh broke. We're going to break down the draft. We are going to go over who we think is going to be available and who the Steelers might take in their first and second in 2 second-round picks. We are going to now discuss a lot more about Robinson when we've had an opportunity to dive into his game a little bit more. Interesting comment from Verducci man here. Yes, I would point out, though, the Steelers have done things like this in each of the last 3 seasons before this quote-unquote new front office, which really is the addition of one person and many of the same elements that they've had this whole time. They've been operating along these lines already. But yes, it is aggressive. I'm not pinning it all on the idea that this is just one front office, this entirely new regime. This is largely the same group. They have made moves for players like Robinson, perhaps not players that have a pretty nice fantasy football history the way Robinson does, but Robinson hasn't been a highly effective NFL receiver for 2 seasons now. Not 100% sure what they're getting from him, but all we can really say is he has a fairly lengthy and recent injury history. So that said, this really could be a deal like William Jackson, a guy that, isn't really able to play. Jackson's probably not the right example for that. Schobert played quite a bit. I don't know how good he was, but he got paid a bit. Jacksonville, I think they only picked up like $3 or $4 million of his $8 million. And he was a full-on player. I don't know if Robinson, if he's healthy, I don't know if that's the plan for Robinson, to get him the ball quite a bit, a similar opportunity like Schobert got, or if he's going to be like Jackson and just literally never dress. Does anybody know anybody who bought a William Jackson III Steelers jersey? That would be fun to see. I'm not sure we would have been able to profit less from that move. But the Steelers didn't give up anything for that either. They paid him, sure, but not a huge, they weren't paying a whole lot by the end of the season. I think they ended up paying $3 million. Normally you say you can't take it with you, but when it comes to the NFL salary cap rules, yes, you can. Doesn't matter. Not a highly impactful move one way or the other. So to recap once again, New Standard Podcast. I'm Neil Coulong, your host. The Steelers and Rams are finalizing a trade to send veteran wide receiver Allen Robinson to the Steelers. Robinson has not played much the last 2 years and was not effective at all when he did play. But a couple of years ago, he was pretty good when he was with the Bears before he came to the Rams. The Rams gave up early on a pretty extensive, lucrative contract, of which Robinson has 2 functional years remaining this season and next year, both of which give him a base salary of $10 million. The Rams are footing the bill for his $5.25 million roster bonus that was paid this year. And the Steelers are now on the hook for his $5.75 million roster bonus next year. A year that really does not seem likely where we sit today that he will make, but it's very possible. They might have a veteran receiver for next season as well. I don't know. Anybody has any other questions that they want to get in here? Do it now, because I don't know how much more I can really go over here. We are going to go into this more in depth tomorrow. New Standard Podcast, full show, both of us in full force. Pre-draft episode. This is the best time of the year. We love talking about this stuff. We're going to dive into it. And I guess Robinson becomes part of that now, regardless of compensation. It is a point of interest for the Steelers, who make a rare pre-draft April trade for certainly a prominent player. At one point, he was certainly an outstanding player in the league. We don't know what we have with Allen Robinson, but the Steelers might not have given up anything for him either. So a lot of ways this one can turn out, but interesting nonetheless. I'm going to cut it off with that. I'm Neil Coulong. You are listening to the New Standard Podcast. Please tune in tomorrow, Wednesday, 10:30 a.m. Eastern, 7:30 a.m. Pacific. Lance Williams and I are going to go over the draft. We will dig into Robinson a little bit more and probably have a bit more detail. For now, though, I'm going to sign off. Thank you for listening. This was the Emergency Allen Robinson New Standard Podcast.